We're fortunate enough to have some time to sit down with Cary Millsap, the database guru and president of Method R. Cary, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, I was at your talk yesterday, Agile Methods. What was the title exactly?
My Case for Agile Methods.
And as I spoke to you, as I listened to it, it reminded me of a talk I had seen from you previously. Measure once, cut twice.
The named backwards one.
The named backwards, and you had to, I remember you put it in parentheses, or yes, I mean that.
Right.
Something, just because. And it wasn't called Agile then.
Right.
But it really had the same feel to it.
Well,
Can you talk about that?
The subject matter was called Agile, but the paper wasn't. And that paper was inspired actually because I'm a hobbyist woodworker. I've got a shop out back. I mentioned that in the talk. And when I do something that might cut off appendages in my body, I read a lot before I go fire up the saw. So I'm a subscriber to a lot of woodworking magazines, and one of the better ones, Fine Woodworking, is kind of the top echelon, I think, in woodworking magazines. And there was an article in there, a one-page editorial from a very experienced craftsman who, I believe the editorial was titled that, Measure Once, Cut Twice. And of course you look at that and you think, well, that's backwards. It's supposed to be, you're supposed to be very careful in planning and then only do the thing once. But he talked about how the variables of wood that novices don't really understand very well. Like, for example, if you buy a wood plank that's 8 inches wide, by the time you take it home and leave it in your shop for a week, if your humidity is different from the humidity in the store where you bought it, it may be 7 3/4, it might be 8 1/4. And different woods move different widths. And if you sit down and try to model that, if you try to model, I wonder what the humidity is going to be in the house I'm going to put this in, you'll never win. I mean, you can't know everything you need to know. And that was just one of his points. There's probably 30 variables like that with wood. And his point was, you can't just cut out all the pieces and put them in a pile and then come back the next weekend and put them together and expect them all to fit. So what he advised was you do a project a little bit at a time. And a real craftsman with a lot of experience does projects that way. They didn't use the word factor, but as I was reading it, I was thinking of software development and thinking he's factoring his projects along a dimension that's different from cut all the pieces and then build. He's cutting a few pieces, building a little bit, seeing what the dimensions are that he needs to put everything together the next day, cuts a few more pieces, puts them together. And in fact, a really kind of an advanced woodworking technique that I learned maybe in my 3rd or 4th year of doing this is you don't want to cut all the pieces to the right at first. You want to cut some of the pieces too long, because then after you assemble them, it's easy to trim them. And then you can have perfect corners as opposed to having tiny little 1/64th gaps. So all that put together, it reminded me so much of installing software or just building software, because there's so many things we can't know up front.
And that's the whole incremental release cycle of the Agile methods.
Right. It's a combination of incremental design, and it's not to say you don't have a complete design when you begin,
of course,
but you admit to yourself that the design may not be perfect, and you need to have a process to deal with imperfections in the design when you encounter them, because you can't know everything up front. So we can start with a complete design, and we think ahead as far as we can, but we don't cut all the pieces and assume that they're all going to fit.